Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel NPA Discovery, the place where we look beyond famous recordings, dramatic headlines, and romantic legends to discover the complicated human beings behind unforgettable music. Today, we are exploring the brief, brilliant, and deeply haunting life of Jeff Buckley. He released only one completed studio album during his lifetime. He never reached the level of mainstream fame that his voice seemed destined to command. He spent years trying to escape comparisons with a father he barely knew, only to discover that the music industry was eager to build his identity around that connection. Then, just as he was preparing to make a second album and define the next phase of his career, he entered the water at Wolf River Harbor in Memphis and never returned alive. The title of this video suggests that Jeff Buckley finally escaped his father's shadow, only for life to take everything away. I agree with the emotional truth of that idea, but I do not believe Jeff's story should be reduced to a tragic prophecy. He was not born merely to repeat his father's fate. He was not a doomed poet waiting for an early death. And he was not important only because his life ended at 30. Jeff Buckley mattered because of what he created while he was alive, a voice capable of sounding intimate and enormous at the same time, a musical imagination that refused to stay inside one genre, and a performance style that made listeners feel they were witnessing someone discover the song in real time. His death made the story tragic. It did not create the talent. That distinction matters because popular culture often turns artists who die young into symbols rather than people. Their unfinished work becomes myth. Their ordinary mistakes become signs. Their comments are treated like predictions. Every photograph appears to contain a warning that was obvious only after the ending became known. Jeff deserves more than that. He deserves to be understood as a son shaped by absence, a musician shaped by curiosity, a performer shaped by risk, and a young man attempting to build an identity strong enough to survive other people's expectations. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, share it with another music lover, and subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to continue creating thoughtful stories about artists whose music reached far beyond the length of their lives. Now, let us return to Southern California to a family already divided before Jeff Buckley could understand what family meant. Jeff Scott Buckley was born on November 17, 1966. His mother, Mary Guibert, had met musician Tim Buckley while they were still young. Their relationship developed rapidly, but the idea of family did not hold them together. The exact chronology surrounding Tim's departure has been described differently over the years. What matters emotionally is clear: Jeff grew up without a meaningful relationship with his biological father. Tim Buckley pursued music. Jeff remained with his mother and later lived within a family shaped by his stepfather. This created one of the central contradictions of Jeff's life. The father was physically absent but culturally present. Tim's face could appear in photographs. His name existed on records. His voice entered rooms through speakers. Critics and musicians discussed him as an adventurous artist. Yet to Jeff, the famous musician was not a source of ordinary childhood memory. There were no years of shared breakfasts, school drives, arguments over homework, or quiet conversations after difficult days. The world could know Tim Buckley as an artist while Jeff barely knew him as a man. That difference is painful in a way outsiders may not immediately understand. When a parent dies after years of closeness, grief is connected to memories. When an absent parent dies, grief may be connected to possibilities. The child is not only mourning what existed. He may be mourning what will now never exist. No future meeting can repair the past. No adult conversation can explain the abandonment. No apology can arrive. Jeff would spend much of his life resisting the idea that Tim Buckley should define him. But resistance itself can become a form of connection. The more strongly a person says, "I am not him," the more the comparison remains present. This is common in families shaped by abandonment. A son may refuse his father's habits while constantly measuring himself against them. A daughter may choose the opposite kind of relationship while still organizing her life around the wound left by the parent. Absence does not mean influence disappears. Sometimes absence becomes the loudest influence of all. For much of his childhood, Jeff was known as Scotty Moorhead, using the surname connected to his stepfather. This name offered distance from Tim Buckley. It allowed Jeff to exist inside the family that was physically present rather than the one represented by a famous but absent musician. Names carry more than identification. They carry history, expectation, belonging, and public interpretation. For a child, taking a stepfather's name can be a practical fact. For someone who later becomes an artist, the choice may acquire symbolic meaning. Scotty Moorhead belonged to childhood, home, and the person Jeff was before the music industry began asking questions about inheritance. If Tim was not truly his father in lived experience, then Jeff did not owe the world a continuation of Tim's story. But the music world saw the surname and heard resemblance. Listeners love artistic bloodlines because they create narrative order. The son of a musician becomes a musician. The voice appears to travel between generations. The story feels destined. For the person living it, destiny may feel like theft. It can make personal achievement appear inherited rather than earned. Jeff would eventually face that problem directly on a stage dedicated to Tim Buckley. Before that moment arrived, death closed the possibility of a real relationship between father and son. Tim Buckley died in 1975 at the age of 28 after an overdose. Jeff was 8 years old. The father who had already been absent became permanently unavailable. Reports differ on whether Jeff was invited to the funeral. The source material emphasizes that he did not attend. This detail later mattered to him. Funerals do not repair relationships, but they create a ritual around finality. They allow people to say goodbye, express anger, feel confusion, or simply witness that a life has ended. Jeff did not receive that experience in childhood. The lack of a funeral memory left the relationship emotionally unfinished. How do you grieve a person who gave you life but did not share your life? There is no culturally simple answer. Other mourners may speak about the person's humor, habits, generosity, or artistic brilliance. The abandoned child may listen while holding a completely different truth. The public says, he was extraordinary. The child thinks, he did not stay. Both can be true. After Tim's death, Jeff began using the name Jeff Buckley more consistently. That decision can be interpreted in several ways. Perhaps it represented a connection to the father. Perhaps it represented an attempt to take ownership of the name. Perhaps it was simply part of growing older. Whatever the motive, the name that would later attract industry attention became central to his adult identity. The decision was emotionally complex. To carry the surname was to carry a history he had not created. But refusing it might allow that history to remain controlled by Tim alone. Taking the name could become an act of reclamation. Jeff Buckley would not mean only Tim's abandoned son. It could mean the artist Jeff chose to become. By adolescence, Jeff had decided that music would be central to his life. This choice is often described romantically, as though he simply followed an inherited calling. In reality, musical development requires unromantic work. Scales. Repetition. Bad rehearsals. Technical frustration. Playing for people who are not listening. Accepting jobs unrelated to artistic ambition. Jeff studied music after high school and worked while performing with different groups. He explored jazz, reggae, rock, and other styles rather than committing immediately to one commercial identity. This period was essential. An artist who becomes famous early may never develop outside public expectation. Jeff spent years learning before the world began watching closely. He played guitar for other musicians. He observed different performance cultures. He absorbed how rhythm changes emotional meaning. He learned that a voice does not need to remain at one volume, texture, or emotional distance. His later singing could move from a whisper to a cry without feeling like a technical demonstration. That ability was built through listening as much as singing. Jeff's musical curiosity also protected him from becoming a copy of Tim. The father had pursued his own adventurous path. The son's response was not imitation but expansion. He wanted to encounter music wherever it felt alive. This made him difficult to summarize. Was he an alternative rock singer? A folk interpreter? A soul vocalist? An art rock guitarist? A romantic balladeer? The answer could change within one performance. Labels helped the market. Jeff seemed more interested in whether the song was emotionally true. Jeff spent time in New York around 1990, playing in cafes and searching for opportunities. The city has a powerful mythology for artists. People arrive believing intensity will recognize intensity. They imagine that talent will become visible because the city values originality. But New York is filled with talented people. The city does not automatically reward arrival. Jeff encountered limited opportunity during this early period. He played, listened, and discovered new influences, including Qawwali, a devotional musical tradition associated with South Asia and Sufi expression. This influence mattered because Qawwali treats voice not merely as a vehicle for lyrics but as an instrument capable of repetition, ascent, surrender, and spiritual intensity. Jeff was attracted to music that crossed the boundary between performance and possession. He admired singers who seemed overtaken by the emotional force of the song. Later, listeners would describe his own performances in similar terms. He could appear to enter a private space on stage while thousands of people watched. That quality was not accidental. It came from studying forms in which singing functions as transformation. Still, artistic growth did not immediately create a career. Jeff remained unknown. He needed an opening. The opportunity that arrived would bring him directly into the story he had spent years trying to avoid. In 1991, producer Hal Wilner organized a tribute concert honoring Tim Buckley. Jeff was invited to perform. The offer contained both opportunity and danger. Professionally, the concert could place him in front of influential people. Emotionally, it required him to stand publicly inside his father's legacy. If he performed well, people might say the talent came from Tim. If he refused, they might say he was running from the connection. There was no neutral choice. Jeff later explained that the event mattered because he had not attended Tim's funeral and had never been able to say what needed to be said. The concert became a delayed act of farewell. This interpretation is more meaningful than the accusation that he used the event only to advance his career. Both effects could exist at once. An emotionally sincere decision can also create professional opportunity. Human motives are rarely pure enough to fit one sentence. Jeff performed several of Tim's songs. One of them, I Never Asked to Be Your Mountain, carried a painful connection to Jeff and his mother. Another, Once I Was, became especially emotional. The son sang the father's words while an audience watched for resemblance. But the performance was not simply an imitation. Jeff's voice carried his own history into the song. Tim had written from one position. Jeff sang from the position of the person left behind. The meaning changed. This is what interpretation can do. A song does not remain emotionally owned by the writer once another person sings it from lived experience. Jeff used Tim's material to speak to Tim. The stage became the funeral he had missed. It also became the doorway into Jeff's own career. The tribute performance attracted attention. Industry figures saw that Jeff possessed more than a famous surname. He had presence. His voice could hold vulnerability without becoming weak. He could create intensity without relying on volume alone. This visibility produced a difficult irony. The father who had not supported him in life helped open a professional door after death. Jeff may have resented that reality. He may also have understood that refusing every opportunity connected to Tim would allow the absence to control him indefinitely. At some point, resistance must become ownership. Jeff could not change the reason people first looked. He could change what they saw once they did. During the tribute, he performed with guitarist Gary Lucas. Their musical connection led to collaboration. Together, they developed songs and eventually worked within the group Gods and Monsters. On paper, the partnership offered everything Jeff needed. Experienced musicians. Industry attention. A structure through which songs could develop. But collaboration requires more than combined talent. It requires a shared understanding of identity, authority, and future direction. Jeff soon discovered that this group could not contain the artist he was becoming. Gods and Monsters appeared promising. Jeff and Gary Lucas had musical chemistry, and the group attracted attention. But the source describes an environment in which members seem to be looking for the same thing, a path to individual success. This is a fragile foundation for a band. A strong group requires people to create something none of them fully controls. If each member views the band primarily as a vehicle, every decision becomes a struggle over who is driving. Jeff had already spent his life resisting another person's story. He was unlikely to remain comfortable inside a structure where his identity felt negotiated by others. After an important showcase in 1992, he decided to leave. The decision surprised his collaborators. Professionally, it looked reckless. The band had finally reached a moment many musicians wait years to experience. Jeff walked away. This choice reveals one of his defining qualities. He preferred uncertainty to a success that felt false. That preference can be admirable. It can also become destructive if an artist rejects every structure capable of supporting the work. Independence and isolation can look similar from the outside. Jeff believed he needed to discover his own sound without the desperation surrounding the group. He wanted the music to feel natural. That word matters. Natural did not mean easy. It meant the work should emerge from an honest center rather than from competition over who would become famous first. The failure of Gods and Monsters clarified his direction. Sometimes an unsuccessful collaboration provides more value than a successful compromise. It tells the artist what cannot continue. Jeff Buckley spent much of his life trying to become visible without becoming trapped. He wanted the world to hear him. He did not want the world to decide who he was before listening. His father's name opened doors and cast shadows. Jeff entered the shadow, faced it on stage, and walked beyond it. He did not erase Tim Buckley. He created enough light of his own that the comparison became unnecessary. That achievement required courage. Not the loud courage of a dramatic confrontation. The quieter courage of singing a father's song while carrying the wound that father created. The courage of leaving a promising band because the music felt dishonest. The courage of standing alone in a small cafe without production to hide behind. The courage of making a debut album that did not fit neatly into a commercial category. The courage of planning a second record that some existing fans might reject. Jeff's life also contained recklessness. Courage and recklessness are not the same. Courage accepts necessary risk in service of meaning. Recklessness underestimates risk because the immediate moment feels more powerful than consequence. Jeff showed both. His artistic risks created work that survived. His final physical risk ended every future work he might have created. We do not honor him by confusing the two. We honor him by learning from both. There is another lesson in the relationship between Jeff and Tim. Many people spend their lives trying to escape a parent's shadow. Perhaps the parent was absent. Perhaps the parent was famous. Perhaps the parent was destructive. Perhaps the family constantly compares one generation with another. Jeff's story reminds us that freedom does not always mean pretending the shadow never existed. Freedom can mean turning toward it and saying, "You affected me, but you do not own the meaning of my life. You gave me a name, but I will decide what that name becomes. You left a pattern, but I am not required to repeat it. You created an absence, but I can create presence." Jeff created presence through his voice. When he sang, listeners felt someone completely inside the moment. That presence is why the recordings remain powerful. Technology preserves sound, but sound alone does not explain survival. Many records remain available and are rarely heard. Jeff's music continues because listeners find something unfinished within themselves when they encounter it. A longing they could not name. A grief without a clear object. A love containing both devotion and loss. A desire to become more than inherited expectation. This is what great performance does. It gives form to emotions the audience already carries. Jeff did not need to live a long life to create that connection. But we should never use the beauty of what remains to pretend the lost years do not matter. He should have been allowed to make the difficult second album. He should have been allowed to disappoint people. He should have been allowed to change his voice, abandon old songs, write weaker songs, recover, mature, and surprise everyone again. He should have been allowed to become older than Tim. He should have been allowed to discover who Jeff Buckley was at 40, 50, and beyond. The fact that we cannot hear those futures is the real tragedy. Not that he fulfilled a prophecy. Not that he belonged to a romantic club of artists who died young. The tragedy is that an ordinary accident removed extraordinary possibility. And yet, possibility is not the only measure of a life. Jeff completed something. He completed an album that traveled farther than he did. He completed performances that continue finding listeners who were not born when he entered the studio. He completed a transformation of the Buckley name. He entered music history as himself. For anyone afraid that one body of work is too small, remember this: volume does not determine impact. One honest album can travel farther than a large catalog created without emotional truth. For anyone waiting for perfect conditions, remember Shine, the room does not need to be large for the work to become important. For anyone trapped by family history, remember the tribute concert: facing the past does not mean surrendering to it. For anyone tempted to romanticize danger, remember Wolf River Harbor: a beautiful spirit is not protected from physical reality. Talent does not make currents weaker. Potential does not make the body invulnerable. And for anyone who believes their life must become legendary to matter, remember the actual source of Jeff's power: he listened. He practiced. He entered songs fully. He allowed vulnerability to become sound. Those choices are available before fame and independent of fame. Jeff Buckley's final song in the water was not a carefully selected farewell. It was music inside an ordinary moment that suddenly became the last moment. That is why we should not postpone expression. Say what needs to be said. Complete what is ready enough to leave your hands. Take the small stage seriously. Do not allow another person's absence to become your entire identity. And do not confuse surviving a risk with mastering it. The world did not lose Jeff Buckley because he lacked talent, love, or future plans. It lost him because life can change before any of those things are finished. That truth is frightening. It is also empowering. It means the moment available now deserves our full presence. The song being written now deserves attention. The person beside us deserves honesty. The life we inherited deserves to be examined, not blindly repeated. Jeff's voice still rises from recordings with the strange intimacy of someone standing close by. For a few minutes, the ending disappears. He is not missing in the river. He is not the abandoned child. He is not the son of Tim Buckley. He is not the young legend frozen at 30. He is simply a musician inside the song, listening, risking, reaching, and becoming. That is where we should meet him. Not only at the site of his death. At the point of creation. Because the harbor explains how his life ended, the music explains why the life still matters. Thank you for joining us for this journey through the life, art, and unfinished promise of Jeff Buckley. Let us know in the comments which Jeff Buckley performance means the most to you and what you feel when you hear his voice. Please like this video, share it with another music lover, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply human stories from behind the music. And until next time, remember, you may inherit a shadow, but you do not inherit a finished destiny. You may begin in absence and still create presence. You may have only one great work inside you, or you may have a lifetime of work still waiting. Either way, do not wait for permission to become yourself. Step into the small room. Sing the song honestly. Finish what you can. Love people while they are here. Respect the ordinary risks that can take extraordinary futures away. And when the world tries to explain you through someone else's name, answer not with argument but with work so unmistakably your own that comparison finally becomes silence.